So now I go back to my question, so why are we here? And the answer I want is a different one. Because who is a cardiologist or a physician in the audience? Okay. Everybody? No? What else? Industry? Ah, okay. Paramedical, nursing, or okay. Who's doing clinical trials at a site somewhere out there? Oh, okay. So that's basically the challenge that we have, because for this last several years in my career, that's what I do almost full time now. And what do we know about planning and running a clinical trial from the point of view of those of us who are working out at a site? Well, I'm just going to remind you that running clinical trials sometimes is an enormously challenging task. There are so many obstacles that get worse and worse. You drown in the paperwork. You've got so many challenges. But I just want to remind us in 4 quick slides why it's worth doing. Because in my time as a doctor, as a cardiologist, I've seen the world of cardiology change quite dramatically. And we all know today that Consensus 1 showed that adding an ACE inhibitor to class 4 heart failure caused a dramatic reduction in mortality. Who could dream of treating a patient with heart failure in 2019 without an ACE inhibitor? It's amazing, but there we are. This is the original slide shown by Salim Yusuf at ACC in March 2001. I remember it was in Orlando, because it was such a huge finding that dual antiplatelet therapy means clopidogrel in addition to aspirin versus placebo in addition to aspirin, means aspirin alone, had a 20% relative risk reduction in patients with ACS in the CURE trial. And who knows what would have happened if that hadn't been invented. And then the PCI cure showed that particularly in PCI you need DAPT. And now we're discussing how much DAPT, which DAPT, and all the questions. But that's where it all starts. So amazing finding. And this is, again, the original slide from ESC 2009, wow, 10 years ago. Dabigatran versus warfarin, 2 doses. We showed that NOACs are better than Coumadin. Who would dream of a world where there was no alternative to Coumadin? And the last thing that's now very topical in the last few years, this is Empereg. It's already 3 or 4 years ago. But there's a number of studies now, Empereg, showing that the effect of SGLT2 inhibition in diabetes mellitus, you can save lives, prevent heart failure, and so on and so on. We all know that. So it's really worth it. Now, the question is, how did these trials succeed? And the answer is, when you do a trial, you must ask a very specific question. The objectives must be clear and well-defined. Do ACE inhibitors improve survival? Is DAPT superior to aspirin or equivalent to aspirin? Is dabigatran better or the same as warfarin? Does the choice of anti-glycemic drug change the future? The answer is yes, but 5 years ago I would have said probably not. So that's how we've progressed. And that makes our life there worthwhile. You've done the trial, you were part of these studies, maybe yes, maybe not, you're part of trials now, you can change practice. So what's there out of the site? Well, the PI, well, those of you who are PIs know what it means. You have to be a doctor or a dentist. The thing is that what is the job of the PI? And I want you to watch the bottom line. The PI is responsible for everything in a trial. And I can tell you in my country, which is Israel, everybody, every cardiologist says, yeah, I'll do that trial and I want to be the PI. But I think they don't really realize what it means. It means you've got to really be responsible. You're responsible if something goes wrong. You're responsible if everything goes right. You've got to check every informed consent, check and sign every case record forms, blah, 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 and you have to put a lot of time. So if you're doing it, do it properly. Take it seriously. Those of us who are here clearly take it seriously. That's why we're here. But there are many challenges when you're arranging trials in your country or with the group you're working with. I choose my sites very carefully because I know what people are likely to do and how well they're going to do their job. And it doesn't help me when the trial ends and the investigator, the PI, is somewhere in Japan on a tour and I can't get him to sign the CRF and the trial has to close out. So you've got to be available if you're the PI. What about the research team? The PI has to choose his research team. So you'll have sub-investigators, you'll have study coordinators, which can be nurses. We have a nurse, more than one nurse. We have one biotechnician, so if we need to do exercise testing or echo stuff, she can do it. We have social workers and others, and we administer a security report. My personal assistant actually is a trained lawyer, so it's amazingly efficient and makes my life a pleasure. Now, if you're a resident and trainee, anybody here? No? No? Okay. So for these guys, what do I tell my residents and trainees? If you join the trial, you've come to do cardiology, I'm training in cardiology, now I'll say, okay, so I want you to join the trial. We're running right now a trial called, let's say, IMPA-REG. I can't tell what we're running now, see, it's secret. So IMPA-REG is running, go join the team, you're going to look for patients, you're going to do this and that. So the advantage is you're going to get early access to the latest treatment strategies. You're going to learn that there is a great possibility, a distinct possibility to change the future of diabetic patients. You're going to learn all the literature. You're going to get piled onto your head all the theory of stuff that you never learned about before. You're going to get access to the top investigators. You're going to the research meeting. You're going to go and shake hands with, if it's a cardiology trial, Eugene Brownwald or Salim Yusuf or somebody. And that's very exciting. You're going to learn research methods very fast. What's the protocol? What's an informed consent form? What's GCP? What are all this stuff, statistics, which we're going to learn in this course here? Attention to detail. But what's it going to cost? I think up front you have to know and tell the people, you know, there's the one thing. You don't have much independent thought here. The protocol's already been written by a group of guys sitting somewhere in Boston or Canada or Europe or wherever it is. Some center, and you're going to have less time for your own independent research. And in our place, I try and encourage people to do this, not full-time, but to do both. To have some independent projects and some clinical trials. You actually are not encouraged to ask questions, because the protocol is written, and when a guy, and I've got a new fellow who's a smart guy, and for 10th time he asks me, why are they not looking at MRI to look at ventricular mass and volume, because IMPA-REG, empagliflozin, how does it work? Is it going to change the volume of the ventricle? It turns out it does. It's going to change the myocardial mass. It turns out it reduces myocardial mass and stuff like that. But why is it not in every other protocol? Eventually, you know, you can ask a number of questions. You say, look, I don't know, just do the trial, don't think. Exactly the thing to say to a new fellow, don't think. And then the publication's another issue. Where does your name come? There are not 1,000 sites or 500 sites. It's fairly low on the scale, but it's better than nothing. So your name might be as a co-investigator or investigator. You're unlikely to be the first author, because that's going to be, let's say, Chris Granger or somebody like that. But still, you're in the loop. That's what we do, trials, and that's how I encourage people, and our people really like doing trials. What about the sites? You've got to have people to do the trial. You've got to have young fellows. What about the site? You've got to have the facilities. We can go fairly quick here. Remember that you have to keep all these records for a long time. In Israel, you have to keep these files for 15 years, more than the European directive. So our hospital, I pay out of the budget for storage facilities somewhere off-site. And sometimes you're asked to see them. You know, when Aristotle came out, all you guys with me, Aristotle, Pixaban, yeah, Noack, the results were so good. Remember, 10% survival benefit even, superiority to warfarin, less bleeding. There was a huge investigation before the FDA or before it was presented. We had to get all the files back, and they actually sent out people to site inspections to check that where are the codes that we were asked, did you break the codes? Were you cheating? And I'd go and find the whole lot and show that it was all intact. And they did this in a lot of sites. It took about 6 months before they got the drug approved by FDA. So you've got to keep this stuff under lock and key. You've got to have space to work. You've got to have place for your drug. This is, I think, PCSK9 inhibitor drug where they have certain temperatures. You've got to do the bloods. You've got to spin them. Those of you all know them. We've sometimes shipped bloods in vapor ships at -80. You keep them for -80 and then put them in vapor ship abroad. It's very cost effective rather than sending them one at a time. You've got to have the proper equipment, the modern desk may show, not so modern anymore, it's a few years ago, but this is certainly very modern and, in my opinion, one of the most important parts of our equipment in our lab. So what about the patients? We heard about it before. You can't do a trial if you don't have patients. And the patients are really two groups. Some are inpatients, some are outpatients. Referral based. Again, in my country, I'm just sharing experiences to show you the same, but when I get a thing, I learn from every trial. When I fill in the form, they say, how many patients have you got? So I say, oh, we've got hundreds of patients like this. But let's try and be realistic. I try and be honest with whoever's asking. So say, okay, so we've got X number per year, X number per this, and that, and that. They're outpatients, blah, 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 blah. We've got a referral base. I can just want to tell what you guys are. I don't know if you have the same experience or not, but when you start the trial, I always have surprises. I find that you cannot recruit patients. Of all these hundreds of people, the first one we look for doesn't fit because I forgot that in the criteria somewhere he's got abnormal something or other which he doesn't have, and so on and so forth. It gets you a while to get started. But if you've been honest and you've realized your limitations and advantages properly, eventually it works out and you do perform as you should. But in that case, you must start off by being honest and don't just say, yeah, we can do it, which a lot of people in my country do. They want to be in on the team, then they recruit 2 people. What turns out from the statistics is that about 70% of patients in most clinical trials come from 30% of the sites. In fact, some people will even say, yeah, let's stay on that. 70% come from 30% of the sites. So the next time we do a trial, and this is a real experience we had with the PHRI group, Salim Yusuf's group, we said, I don't want to pay, it's a huge expense to open all these sites. Bring me the 30% of the sites that recruit 70% of the patients. So we went round to sites and we said, okay, we're limiting the sites, we're cutting down. If you're going to join the study, we expect this, that, and the other. And I went to sites that I really knew were the best performers with the best track record. At the end of the trial, what happened was 70% of the patients came from 30% of those sites. Because things change out there. People leave, people move, people have other competing agendas. And so it's a real challenge. But when you commit a trial, try and deliver the goods. What you promised, try and get it done. So trial procedures. After identifying the patient, please get them to sign the informed consent properly. Apparently, I'm told that this is the commonest issue in FDA trial audits. I've not had an FDA audit, an inspect, not an audit. Our country has lots of audits now. I can tell you the national committee, the regional committee, the local committee, the hospital committee. People have nothing to do, set up a committee. When they've got nothing else to do, they set up an extra committee. Then these committees have to find something to do. So they set up a protocol to investigate. But still, on all of them, the commonest error is the informed consent forms. And I cannot understand this. You have to get there's a standard form. You have to just explain to the patient whatever you have to explain to them. Some of them understand, some have difficulty, some take it home, some want time, whatever it is. But when you've done all that, even that you can't be documented. The biggest thing is that it wasn't signed at the end by the patient. Sometimes you see a signature and the date is written in by another handwriting altogether, which is just not legal, at least in Israel. So just do the small things, because as with everything in life, especially in medicine, cardiology, the small details is what makes the quality of the work. Attention to detail. Okay, another thing you have to do is inform the family practitioner record system. In our experience, again, very important. If you want to keep the patient on the drug in the trial till the end, make sure that you share the data with the family practitioner, be available to talk to him, answer questions, and so you're not working against other people. Now, what about the ethics committee? Well, I don't know what you guys think, but I at one time had a very firm antagonism to our ethics committee, particularly the chairman of our IRB, who I felt was being particularly obstructionist, which was true, and holding us back, particularly being deliberately difficult, because maybe thinking, why should they be doing all this? All I'm doing is not being helpful, not being supportive. But when you think about it, the IRB is there to protect patient safety, but there's another heading, not on the slide, that says to protect the physician. Because when something goes wrong in the trial, and there's been stuff on the internet lately, there was once a case where people took some drug for cognitive function, and the patient lost all cognitive what they had lost. It was an experimental drug in France. There was another thing recently in Israel about a child who had some malignancy. I think it was hematological malignancy. Was in a research study in a major Tel Aviv medical center, and the child died. And then the hospital got sued, and the investigators got sued by parents and families and lawyers. Again, they don't have anything else to do except do law. And so when your law practice is looking for work, you go and sue doctors. And I'm not saying it's bad or good. I'm just saying it happens. Who saves the physician in the study? The fact that the study has been approved by the best thinking minds in the United States, let's assume this is true, of the FDA, they are good people, have approved it. The EMA have approved the study. A local board has approved the study. A lot of people were consulted. So the answer is, look, we did the best we could. We did it in good faith. We thought we were going to actually advance medicine. It didn't work out. We really feel terrible. But we didn't just throw out a drug. It's been approved by all the companies. So you learn after a while that these guys are actually indirectly on our side, on the same side. I'm going to leave out some of this stuff. What about financing? We heard a bit about it. You can work a hierarchy like you can with anything in medicine. Start with congenital or acquired. It can be non-funded, local funded, research grants, or contract research with a sponsor, which is most of the stuff we do because it's become impossible to get these funds. So if we didn't do that, we wouldn't be able to do that. So most of it's done with industry, and then it becomes complicated, and you've got lawyers, and you've got different things. The contract research organization is hired by the sponsor, right, to work with, we've got the industry here, work with the sites. Okay, now the problem is, they do site selection, feasibility, contract submissions, initiations, monitoring, and so on and so forth. But the role of the monitor is out there to ensure integrity, and so on and so forth. But there's a huge conflict of interest between the sponsor, the CRO, and the site physician. Because the site physician wants to advance science, and to keep, if I'm the head of a clinical research institute, I need to bring in funds to keep the site going. So I need, how many patients am I randomized in my trial? Okay. The CRO might be paid by hour of work doing the submissions, putting in the paperwork together before you start. So we have a case where it took, for 1 year, I was arguing, when are we starting this trial? We have put together allocated patients already. We have site coordinators. We're all working on it. The CRO is working, but their office are full of people working on the paperwork. So after 1 year, these guys are paid by the hour, whatever they're paid, by the month, by the person. The trial was called off. So they were happy. Nobody could see the problem. They did their job. They tried to get it through. The trial was called off for various reasons by the sponsor. The site, we were really very angry about this and wrote some nasty letters as best we could, politely, but nasty, saying we don't think this is on. And nothing much came of it. I knew nothing would come of it because that's what you deal with. The point is that a good working relationship between the site, the monitor, and the CRO is essential. If you can't get on with your CRO and your monitor, then you don't start the project and you'll never do a decent trial. So it's really useful. The monitor might have a defensive perspective. Their motivation might be bureaucratic. They might be motivated by profit. That's legitimate. That's what they're there for. They're there to make money. But nonetheless, I come back to it, they do a lot of input, and you have to get on the same side and work very well together, then you'll do a good trial. Adjudication. I'm jumping to a few other subjects before we get to the end. As a site investigator, the first studies we did, I was there when we started clinical trials, sort of on the basis we're there today. I got offended. I said, why do I need some guy who I think knows nothing about medicine or doesn't know something about medicine sitting in Kazakhstan or in India or in New York or in Brussels have to tell me whether my patient had an acute MI as an endpoint or not. I know it's acute MI. I know exactly what this patient is. It's not the reason. The point is you want standardization. But as we all know, sometimes it's not so clear. non-ST elevation MI, minor borderline troponin, high sensitivity, what's the protocol, what's the definition? So you have to have an adjudication. Hospitalization for heart failure. It's another one right now on an adjudication panel. What's hospitalization for heart failure? And the question is, does he have to have the symptoms? What symptoms? Shortness of breath, weight gain, all of them, both of the above. What do you define it as? Or he's just sent in by his doctor because he looked a bit out of breath. Maybe he ran too much. You have to have some kind of standardization. So you try and get a uniform result across the studies. You'll get, let's call it a so-called valid result to a trial. Adjudication can be central or national. It can be total or partial. In the COMPASS study, which was just finished about a year ago, we used a semi-automated system because there, it was decided by the PHRI group, whom I've worked with for many years, that really for ST elevation MI, if the site sent in an EKG that shows ST elevation, and the patient had chest pain for more than X time, and the patient had a primary PCI, and the troponin was elevated, that will probably be accepted as acute myocardial infarction without the need for an adjudication committee. And in that way, we actually got rid of about, I think, 30 or 40% of the adjudications of that study. And I think that will be the future. The challenge is to write the algorithms to do it properly and then to validate back and forth to be sure that they do it. We have a rule in most of the studies I adjudicate that if there's by default, the site is correct. They saw the patient. But sometimes they make good errors. Another error commonly at the site I've seen by the research coordinators. And I've seen people on a trial for PAD confuse VTE with PAD, saying the patient had an event in the leg or something happened. And where it's clearly been whatever it was, they said arterial disease instead of venous thrombosis, or vice versa, and just an oversight or looking. So sometimes you do need to adjudicate and say, yes, it was the person who filled it in didn't understand exactly what was going on. But that's why you need adjudication. Now, the last thing we're going to talk about is patient retention. That's a new word. What I'm told all the time by the people who are running the trial with me in the country, let's assume it's a sponsor, he's a representative of the CRO, and they call me and they say, so can you help us? We've got 20 sites. Our challenge now is to keep the patients in the trial. And I said, this is not a challenge because every patient is in the trial. And no patient can ever leave a trial because if he took one dose of the medication, you can argue when he's in the trial, okay? When he signed the consent, when he was randomized, when he swallowed the first tablet. The most hard endpoint of those three is when he swallowed the first tablet. And some studies, I'm sure you've all done, where the patient's asked to take the first dose of medication when he's there at the site to be sure he's got one. But once he's taken a dose, you don't know that maybe if he did not take an antithrombotic at that time, he may have had some thrombotic event the same day. So you saved his life. Even though after that, tomorrow he decided, I'm not doing this anymore. So everybody who entered the trial has to be in the trial forever and ever. The issue is, can you follow him up and get the information? So when people say, does he leave a trial, it means, are you losing patients to follow up, okay? So let me show you why it's so important to keep the patients followed. And it's as simple as that. You'll see it in the next slide. But we have a protocol in our place saying that if the patient says, look, Professor Lewis, with due respect, I think this drug's a load of nonsense. My mother-in-law, my wife's mother, or my husband's mother, or my neighbor told me this drug is terrible. She heard about it on the internet, it's going to kill me. So I don't want anything to do with it. Or my whatever. I'll say, that's okay. You know something? You've got a view. I'll try and explain to them. That's what you should do at a site. But, you know, if you refuse, that's okay. But we are responsible for following you for your health. I also want to know what's happening to you. You had an MI some years ago. I want to be sure you won't have another as best I can as a doctor. So then the first degree of compromise, I want you to come for all the visits, just in the same way. Take less drug, take a holiday window, take no drug, but I want to follow you up because I know the patient has taken some drug and that could affect, by intention to treat, the outcome of the trial. Maybe it's difficult for you to come, I'll make telephone visits. Maybe you don't want me to call you. We had a patient living abroad somewhere, actually I think in Romania, if I remember correctly. Do you mind if we call you once a year or at the end of the study? No problem. We call them up, find out the patient's alive or dead, or a quick questionnaire. It may not be so accurate, but it's better than nothing. And you should always find vital status, especially it's in the public domain in our country. There's a national, what should I call it? Called the Ministry of Health and the Ministry of the Interior. There's people know wherever you are all the time. So you can get the records available, and the question becomes legally whether you can use them or not. But that's country dependent. I don't want to get into that. What I want to point out is that true total withdrawn consent is exceedingly rare in my experience. If you talk to the patient, he says, I don't have anything to do with it. The patient refused continuation. I don't think I've ever seen that. I said, do you mind just, if I find out if you're dead or alive, ask your wife. I've never seen someone said no. It could happen, but you might say, if he signed informed consent to get into the trial, maybe if it should only be valid if he writes a letter saying, I'm refusing to participate any longer. Because for the CRO or the monitor, the easiest thing is to say lost to follow-up. But then they don't have to worry about locating missing data with all these letters saying, which I'm answering in the back all the time, have we found the EKG of this patient? Was I'm getting mailed as the PI to my coordinators what's going on here and there. Say he's lost to follow-up, he refused, then he's out, maybe. But out of the collection, but not out of the final analysis. And this is what happens in the final analysis if you get it wrong. So please don't get it wrong. Okay, my last slide. Let's take a hypothetical example. We did a trial of 2,000 patients. 1,000 received the placebo or standard therapy. The other 1,000 received active drug. This was a great drug. In the placebo arm, 200 had an event that was a composite endpoint of an event or death. 200, tomorrow you'll go into it, or you probably know why you have to have death as well, because, Anyway, 200 were dead. This was a great drug. Only 150 of 1,000. You look at that, the difference is pretty big. It's 50 people out of, you can work out highly significant statistics. Now, that's just the basis. Keep it in mind, you can look up and down there. Now, let's do the same thing and just look at this sentence. Lost to follow-up or withdrawn consent, what's written as, and you don't follow him up and you don't get the data, it's only 5%, let's assume. You got 95% in your database. But let's assume it's 5%, you've lost for whatever reason, and let's assume on 50 in each arm. I mean, it could be different, but play of chance could be, but it's 50 in each arm. Let's look at our placebo arm. 2,000 in the trial, 1,000 took placebo, 200 had an event or dead. Now, should you correct the 200? Well, the FDA will probably say, no, you shouldn't, because the patient had a placebo. What, you gave him a lump of sugar or a piece of, a couple of grains of salt or whatever substance companies put in tablets that didn't do him any harm? Well, just that's fine. So you lost some. The calculated rate, 200, the event rate was there. But what about the guys who were lost from the active drug? You had 150 dying or having an event is 200, but you've lost 50. Now, the FDA will say, excuse me, doctor, you've lost 50 patients here. I'll tell you why you've lost them. You can't find them because they're under the ground. They're dead and buried or they're cremated. Your drug killed them, maybe. Can you tell me that it's not true? It was an active substance. It had never been done before in a mega trial or in whatever trial it was. It's possible. We have to take the worst case scenario. So let's assume the drug did harm rather than good. Let's assume it. We may be wrong, but we have to we have to protect the world. Worst case scenario. So therefore, to your 150 there, you've got to assume that another 50 whom you now can't find are actually dead or had an event, and that's why you can't find them. So now your calculated rate is 200. You've got 200, you've got 200, you've lost the trial. And, this loss to follow-up was a reason that if people remember, there was a trial called the Atlas series, Atlas 1, Atlas 2. It was rivaroxaban, in addition to add-on to DAPT after acute coronary syndromes, can save lives. And from that came the 2.5 twice daily rivaroxaban dose that was then tested subsequently in the COMPASS study, just because in the Atlas study, the statistics had a problem that patients were lost and they couldn't get it through the FDA. In Europe, the drug was approved as an add-on. In the FDA, it was turned down 3 times. because the data were incomplete was of missing data. An assumption that maybe there was something wrong with the data. And I must tell you, as a cardiologist, I thought there was something wrong with the data. How could 2.5 milligrams twice a day be so wonderful if the other doses, it wasn't like a graduated event and maybe there was something? How do you know? So it was not approved, and they had to do another trial of the COMBAT study, which was a huge expense later on, which actually validated the data that it is a good drug, but they shouldn't have lost the patients in the first place. So that's what I have to say about a site perspective. It's a potpourri of various aspects of what you guys, I think, including myself, we're all facing on a day-to-day business, and to give you some thoughts and thinking, what you'd be thinking out there, and to give a better perspective of what we're all thinking together or collectively when we do clinical trials. If I summarize it, to do a successful trial, plan well in the beginning, watch out for missed or late visits so you won't lose patients, motivate the investigators and the patients. Sometimes we have meetings at a site of the patients, we think they're not taking the drug. I give them a talk on why trials are important. And we live in a town with a lot of high-tech. We have 2 universities. We have the beta site for Philips or high-tech companies. It's like a miniature Silicon Valley and Haifa. And we have university professors and God knows what in the trial. So I gave them talks about some of this stuff, showing how trials have changed the future. And they all said, fine, this is great. And we really enjoyed it. And we're motivated to come to visit. I said, so now you're going to take the drug? And they said, no. You weren't convincing enough. Join the working group. All you have to do is go to this website, which is great, by the ESC. You go to working groups, and under the working groups, you choose cardiovascular pharmacotherapy, and there's a direct link to sign up. When you sign up, it gives you particulars. You have to have to upload something. A CV is very easy. You're not automatically approved. It goes to the chairman of the working group, who I am not now. It's Professor Heinz Drexel, who actually will approve or not approve. Our membership is growing. I can't think of any reason why you should not approve new members unless you're a serial killer or something, and you upload it in the information. But we'd like to have you on board. Thanks very much.